Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of Unfair and Unbalanced, a podcast with Roy Snell and Tom Fox. We are taping live today at the SCCE Utilities and Energy Conference in Houston, Texas. So Roy, welcome to 80 Degree Februaries.
I love it, by the way. I haven't said it enough since I've been down here. I left Minneapolis after about 3 weeks of the high being about 20 at the most, and it's a little better there right now, but your high of 70 or 75 is far superior.
There's a few days a year it is worthwhile to live in Houston, and fortunately we've had about 2 weeks of those days. Over the last 2 weeks, I was visiting with someone yesterday, and neither one of us could remember this many perfect days in Houston in a row. No rain, low humidity, 75 degree highs, 50 to 60 degree lows. Really doesn't get a whole lot better than this.
I love your quote. There are a few days a year that are worth living in Minnesota. I'm going to tweet that out or something.
Roy, you have put together a really interesting list of questions, or at least topics for discussion that you think that a governing body, whether that be a board of directors, an audit committee, a compliance committee, should put to a chief compliance and ethics officer. And I wanted to see if we could maybe explore some of those questions and just have you explain what you think, or why you put the question the way you did, and why you think board of directors or governing body should be asking some of these questions. So the first one you have, is there anyone interfering with your ability to implement any elements of your compliance program?
And when we're done, Tom, we're going to talk a little bit about the way to put this list together before you go to the board and suggest they ask these questions. There's some important steps. I don't want to imply that every one of these questions is going to be used by everyone. They're just ideas, and every organization is going to recommend to their board different things. But we got to talk about that process. We're done, and when we're done with talking about a few of these questions, I'd also like to talk about the importance of why the board needs these. But I think the first one you bring up is my favorite. I think the enforcement community, should they come in and do an investigation, and if they were to ask any board member, have you ever heard the question asked of your compliance officer, has anybody been interfered with their ability to implement all the elements of a compliance program? If you don't know the answer to that question, if that question has never been asked by a board member, how can you say the board is engaged? I mean, that's like the fundamental. Is it your air? Do you have air to breathe? You know, I mean, it's still, it could be tough suggesting them to ask that question, but because the people who might be interfering with the
might be the board,
might be in the room.
It might be in the room.
But yeah, I think it's a great one. And I just want people to understand. Get them to ask some more pertinent questions. I'm not that hung up on which ones are these, but I like this one. Anybody interfere with your ability? And the one that goes with it, that is, has anybody interfering with you fixing a problem?
Right.
And kind of be married. There's two separate thoughts there. One is, you're trying to educate, audit, monitor, and implement a compliance program. Is anybody interfering with that? And number two, have you ever tried to fix a problem that machine, the compliance program, found? You ever try and fix a problem, get in your way? If I was the CEO, I'd want to know that. If I was the audit committee, I'd want to know that. If I was the board, I'd want to know that. They don't know this. They don't have this view necessarily all the time. So we have to help them understand you want to know this. Society out there is expecting you as a governing board to do some things related to ethics and compliance and the rule of law, and I can't think of anything more fundamental than is the person responsible for preventing, finding, and fixing problems running into any interference.
We probably should have set the stage a little bit here, because I think it's important that a board do this to fulfill their regulatory function,
right,
in a compliance program. And I think that fulfilling this function needs to be documented.
Yeah.
that this list of questions be in a board meeting and audit committee meeting minutes somewhere, because at some point, some regulator is going to question a board member. What did you ask?
Right.
What did you do? What can you show me to show you were engaged? And if they don't have anything other than a quarterly report of we got 5 hotline calls and we resolved 4 of them, that's not much engagement.
No, I'm afraid too often. And believe me, I understand the board is busy, and we only get a few minutes a year, and we should only get a few minutes a year, but they got to be very important. The audit committee of the board probably should have more like 4 1-hour experiences a year, and more if there's bigger problems currently. But yeah, the enforcement community, society, you can't throw a rock and not hit an article on governance right at the moment. And one of the big objections of the folks in governance is that they're not engaged enough on people breaking the rule of law. And if an enforcement individual is to go in and ask the audit committee, the board as a whole, or an individual, or the chair, what can you tell me about the questions you've asked of those who are preventing, finding, and fixing the problems in your organization? And if they can't recall a single thing that they had asked to make sure it was working right, they go ask the CEO, are we making money? Do we have new ideas in the pipeline? They can answer those questions like they're tattooed on their forehead. But compliance, I'm concerned they're not able to answer that question, and people expect it. So you're right, a good idea to back up. They have to be engaged. Engaged, seems to me, involves asking a question, or 2 or 10. And we're going to kick around a few here of things that the board could ask.
Well, that really leads to the next series of questions, which you put around an area that I don't think compliance officers really specifically think enough about, which is conflicts of interest.
Yeah, I looked like I knew what I was doing when I put all the conflict of interest ones on one page. I didn't notice it until you said it. But yeah, I mean, Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, Health South, Penn State University. These people knew about these problems for 10 years, some of them. And some of them were not that vague. There were some of these problems were problems that a 5th grader could tell you were a problem. And so you got to ask yourself, why didn't they get fixed right away at Enron? Tyco. They found them pretty early on, but they didn't fix them because people had a conflict of interest. The root of almost all material problems that get investigated, big fines, big penalties, big press, were caused by a conflict of interest and not resolved by a conflict of interest. Quite often, they're 2 different people commit 2 different punishable acts. Somebody screws up and does something to make more money or get more power or whatever because they have a conflict of interest. I want. So I'm going to do this thing that's against the rule of law. And then it's discovered, and the organization, rather than jumping down the throat of the problem and strangling it, start having meetings about damage control, and they don't say cover up, but it's what it is. I'm sorry, they're nice people. Sometimes they do this, but what were they doing in the meetings at some of these companies the years after they found the problems? They were covering it up. Now, they wouldn't call it that, and they're nice people, and they tried hard. They just screwed up. But the cover-up is, there are people who are guilty of cover-up that didn't do the problem, and then the people who did the problem. So conflict of interest, I belabored the point, is key. It should be key for the board. So the board could ask, do you have any responsibilities outside of compliance that cause you to have a conflict of interest? If I was a board member, I'd ask, do you report to anybody who has any responsibilities that could cause conflicts of interest? Is anyone with a conflict of interest guiding or directing the compliance and ethics program? I'd ask it inside out and sideways, because sometimes people can answer the question no, but if they were asked the right way, they would say yes.
I'm a lawyer. I'm very familiar with it. I'll answer any question. You just have to ask me the right question.
There you go.
I'm here to answer all questions.
It's a thing of beauty. So if you really care about the conflict of interest, I'd come at it 5 or 6 ways. But board members don't even know to ask this question because they, a lot of times don't know how important it is for them to check to see how the compliance program is doing, and they don't know what are the key things. So I would ask them to ask these questions. And again, anybody listening right now might be thinking about how this is going to sell in their company. I got a suggestion for you at the end of this that will help you with the process of going from these suggestions to actually getting them done in your organization and live to tell about it.
Next point, you ask or suggest a governing body ask the compliance officer about issues that have been brought to his attention, issues that have been resolved, or issues that have not been resolved. Why is this important?
Well, you go back to this thing about Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, Health South, Penn State University. Somebody was running around for years not fixing it. I mean, they might have thought they were fixing it. They might have thought they fixed it. But things have a habit of malingering. And if I'm a board member or CEO or whatever, I don't want problems to be malingering. They have a tendency to fester. More people get in trouble accused of cover-up. Cover-up is just, sometimes people get accused of cover-up and it's justifiable and throw the book at them. Other times they're just malingering. They just can't bring themselves to that final step. So I would ask, are there any issues that have been reported to you that are not being addressed? Has any issue been outstanding beyond a reasonable amount of time? Have we ever had an outside evaluation of our compliance and ethics programs? Might be related, but it's this idea of trying to make sure that we're aggressively resolving problems on a timely basis. People are dang good in this country at finding problems. They are horrible at fixing them on a timely basis.
Well, that really leads to the next general area of inquiry you suggest, and it seemed to me that it was along the lines of, are you taking a look at your own program? Are you asking somebody from the outside to take a look at your program? Are there changes on the outside, either legally or perhaps we're doing business in a new and different way, that need to be factored into our compliance program? I hate to say monitoring is a theme, but that's the one that popped up for me.
Right. Yeah, I really think that the board, and this is really not uncommon for a board, are we leading the field in product development? Are we leading the field in customer service? Do we have a best practice with regard to our marketing approach? The board is really quite interested in best practice and leading the field in a number of areas. What we need them to, as a compliance officer, when we get investigated, I want them to go to the board and be impressed. Okay? I'm not serving up these questions so that I can make sure I get my job done. They don't need to ask me these questions again. I need them engaged. I need them to be able to answer a few questions. I need them to not smack their forehead when the inspector or when the AG or DOJ or somebody walks in the room and say, "Oh, I didn't know we were supposed to be doing that." I want them to be caring about the best practice of compliance. So they should be pushing the compliance folks to say, "If anybody come in and taking a look." And I think there are a lot of good consultants, a lot of good outside counsel who could come in with their own little list of things that they care about. It doesn't take that long to find out somebody hasn't done anything in the area of education in the last year. That's not typically the problem. Or they haven't implemented controls, or they haven't done board education. Or they've said, "You did this real well, but you got to work on that." So you get this outside evaluation. The board should be asking, we care about best practice in product innovation, customer service, marketing, whatever, and we care about best practice. So has anybody come in and checked out your practice? And then are you staying abreast of current trends in enforcement and effective compliance programs? And a compliance officer should pretty eagerly say, I read, I go to conferences, I teach maybe even, and I listen to podcasts. And
Ditto, said Tweedledee.
So yeah, I think these are other great questions, and frankly, a couple of the first suggestions I gave, is anybody interfering? The answers to that could be pretty tough.
Yes.
Are you staying abreast of good practice? There's a softball if ever I saw one. I mean, everybody's going to say yes to that.
Well, how are you doing it? Besides listening to this podcast.
How? Come again?
How are you doing it? I mean, that's the question.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, okay. Let me put it this way. Can I change the comment? The board could ask the question superficially, and it could be a softball question. And you got to have a couple softball questions. I don't think you got to beat on everybody, but the right way to ask that question is exactly what I think you're talking about, which is, are you staying abreast? And I could go even further, Tom. Are you staying abreast? How are you staying abreast? Give me some examples. I happen to poke around in the compliance world a little bit, and I'm not hearing you say anything that I'm hearing out there. Or you could say, as a board, we're going to pick one individual on the board to be a compliance and ethics program expert. We might even put on the board a former compliance officer, maybe even current if it works out somewhere else. Or I'm going to pick somebody, I'm going to train the heck out of them. I'm going to send them to a conference once a year on the audit, somebody on the audit committee. Boy, has that ever changed things. If you actually have somebody on the board that could ask these questions and kind of know what the BS answers are, or know the BS ways to ask the questions and ask them more meaningfully like you did, don't just tell me you're keeping up. Tell me how you're keeping up. That would be a good idea. You know, we've talked about, maybe you and I have talked about this before, but it's been talked about in the industry that there should be more compliance experts on the board. And I'll tell you one other thing. It's not just to be able to ask questions. That's like the least of the reason I would. It's the second best reason I would have a compliance expert on the board. The number one reason why I'd have a compliance expert on the board is so that the compliance officer could walk into the boardroom and say, before the board meeting, and say, I got to bring this up. Here's what I think is going to happen. Here's the help I think I could use from you because you get me. CFO's always got that. CFO's always got somebody on the board that has had finance background. And they go to that person all the time and say, okay, I'm going to bring this up. They're going to think it's a big deal. It's not a big deal. I just need to tell them. I need you to keep everybody's hair from catching on fire. Or, I'm bringing this up. They're not going to see it as a big deal. I need you to light their hair on fire. And it's a silly example, but there's a lot of good reasons to have an expert on the board. And they would think of these questions.
But you take it a little step further, because you suggest that the board ask the Chief Compliance and Ethics Officer about either specific training he's given senior leadership, current events he's given senior leadership, or what has senior leadership done to become more familiar with compliance in general.
This is a big challenge too, because every department wants leadership to spend more time in their area. HR, ethics, compliance. Not every leader has time. So this might be another reason why you'd want to use many different tools for education. But if anybody in the director level on up, maybe even supervisors, directors, department heads, C-suite, the board, they get asked, when's the last time you had training? And what did they teach you? And if during the investigation to determine whether or not you need to be sent a big message or a small message, the answer to that is I can't remember, then you got a problem. So I would just try and find a way to work it in on a monthly basis, just once a year, 1 hour. I'm sorry, you come at them 10 different ways. It's kind of like marketing the hotline, marketing the understanding of the fundamental principles of compliance programs. it's hard to share this stuff on a podcast, but I have a as you saw this morning, this one-page description of a compliance program that helps with the education of people who you only have a few minutes with.
Right.
It's a compliance program on a page with some boxes, and it's simply put as I can do it. And if anybody ever wants it, feel free to contact me. I'll give it to you. You can use it.
You suggest, first of all, one of the questions in business that I have hated the most in my entire professional career is what keeps you up at night.
Yeah.
But
Smart.
you have a series of questions that are along the lines of the
Yes.
following. Put again from a board to a chief compliance officer. Is there anything keeping you from doing your job? Is there anything you need more to do your job? Is there anything that is keeping you from being effective in your job? What more do you need? Not just is anyone keeping you, but what more might you need? Well, kind of describe those.
Right. Well, so I would get at it pretty quickly, and I don't need a half-hour answer on this. If I was a board member, how are we anticipating new potential legal risks? And by the way, the answer to that is talking to your colleagues. What are the problems in your organization that you found in our industry that the enforcement community hasn't thought of yet? And then I would look up the last couple dozen settlements in my industry, and I would say these are the ones they're looking for now. My buddies are telling me the ones they might think of down the road. We're all over these 10. Are there any substantial compliance issues currently under investigation? That's a little difficult because material or substantial are difficult words for everybody in the room to exactly know what they mean, but I think you can get some help from the general counsel and the CEO. Say, here's my list of stuff I'm working on. I don't think these are board worthy, or this one is board worthy. But what issues are the enforcement community currently reviewing? These sorts of things. So I would want to see, and again, maybe this is all for the audit committee of the board that are spending more time, 4 times a year, whatever, an hour a quarter with the compliance officer to ask. But I kind of like your idea. I just might add it to this list. What keeps you up at night?
Please don't ask that. I'm personally offended.
By the way, just curious, what is it? Is it just because it's trite or snarky or been said too much, or?
It's no, because I've never been able to sleep. Everything keeps me.
Well, I'm afraid I'm in a similar boat, and I got to tell you, when I was a compliance officer, I would wake up at 2, 3 in the morning. I'm not sure I wanted to share it with anybody. It was related to the job. It was related to things, but it was a kind of a week. I'll be honest with you. I just share it with you. I was waking up thinking, is anybody ever going to retaliate against me? I mean, I had some investigations going on 20 years ago before compliance programs were really a thing, that they were not happy that anybody was cleaning stuff up. And I was worried about somebody coming after me, or the enforcement community coming in saying, you didn't get to this soon enough, so I'm going to penalize you and your family.
Right.
So I'll put that on the back burner for you. I won't say I'll never ask it, but it's probably sloppy. I'm not sure the general counsel would like that. And again, you got to remind us before we get too close to the end. I want to talk about the process of getting good questions in the hands of the board.
Well, then let's end with what you end with in kind of the summary of questions, and it's asking the board to ask, is there anything we as a board need, could, should, you would like, a bit of self-reflection or at least introspection by the board.
And I would give him this question to ask me so I could teach a little bit. Some of these questions are pretty heavy. Right. The answers are pretty heavy. This one's not necessarily. Could be, is there anything leadership can do to help further develop, maintain, support the compliance and ethics program? I wouldn't give him a heavy lift here. I would use this opportunity for, just bring it up a little more often. Just ask how people are doing. If you find yourself giving a speech in any department of our organization ever, always start with them from the board. I have a number of priorities, one of which is to make sure that we follow the rule of law and behave ethically. So I want you to support the compliance officer and the compliance program. You don't need to word it so self-serving. I want everybody to behave ethically here and follow the rule of law. And I know ethics training or compliance training takes time out of the day, but embrace it. I'm telling you, people are going to, just try and get the board to talk about it a little more often. Are there any further compliance and ethics education that you think leadership should attend? And my answer is I'm never going to get enough time of the average board member to get them to be anywhere near the kind of expertise I need. So I got to tell you this, it's highly doubtful, 1,000,000 to 1 shot, that I'll ever go back in as being a compliance officer. But for a number of reasons. But and mainly due to the fact that I've been pretty vocal. I don't know if it would work out for them. Well, but I really would want to say to the board, I'm not going to be able to get you all expert. And when the enforcement, to be expert, when the enforcement committee comes in, I'm going to say, look, they're busy people, right? They're running a big company here. Here's what I did. I carved out one person. I got him to hire a compliance expert, or I took the person most expert and dragged them off to some 3-day education. Okay? So don't go running around asking everybody a bunch of these questions. You can if you want, but I have something better. You go talk to Bob. Bob knows this stuff inside and out. He's a board member. He's on the audit/compliance committee of the board. We spend the time. He knows the stuff. If you want to know if the board is engaged, you ask if he's engaged. Because if you were to go in and ask if they were engaged in finance, you wouldn't ask it just anybody. You'd ask the person who's always on the board as a finance background. I hope I answered your question properly. I wandered.
There's no proper or improper. There's only answers.
Okay.
But we are nearing the end, but I did want to carve out some time to have you explain the process of thinking through these questions, presenting these questions, getting buy-in to ask these questions. What can you share with us about that?
The big thing, I don't want to give people the impression, whoever sees this list, and I got this list, somebody wants it, email me, I'll send them the whole list. But we didn't mention all the ideas, and you're going to have some ideas. I don't care what the list is. Get them questions to ask you. But the thing that's important to remember as a compliance officer, if I was seeing this list for the first time, as any one of the thousands of compliance officers out there, some of them would offend me, and I go, that's okay. Some of them's too much. Are you kidding me? My CEO's not going to let me have them ask that question. My general counsel's not going to. You're unrealistic, Roy. I totally get it. I appreciate it. Matter of fact, I'm going to do 180 degrees on you. I'm going to suggest that you take the list you want, maybe a list a little more than you want, and you go to the general counsel and you say, look, I'm going to the board. I'm going to tell them, maybe the audit committee, I'm going to tell them these are the list of questions you should ask on a regular basis to compliance program. And if you ever get asked questions about how engaged you are by the enforcement community to determine how big a message they're going to send us, should we ever have an investigation, you tell them we got a series of questions we ask annually, or however often. So that's all I want. I don't care what the list is. I wish it was a robust list, but I understand there's only so much of the hill you can take every year. Okay? If you're going to go in for the first time and ask them to ask you questions, you don't want the CEO and the general counsel to hear it for the first time at the audit committee.
Right.
So, or maybe as someone else, CFO might be more engaged in him. Go see him. Tell him to add a question. Tell him to delete a question. I don't care. And go see the general counsel, the CEO, at a minimum, and anybody else you think might get their nose out of joint. Board chair, audit committee chair, compliance expert on the board. And then you go to the board and you say, here's the official list of questions the board's going to ask on a regular basis of the compliance program, and this is more than most boards have, and we should be very proud of it. Don't forget that it exists. If anybody ever asks you, these are the things that we always ask the compliance officer. The point is, you don't need to die on another hill on this issue. If you bring 15 and they throw out 10, so you got 5. Next year you might say to everybody, hey, I got, maybe we should have a 6th one here. And they add the 6th one a year later, and the year after that, or the month after that, or whatever, and then you got 10. This is a little controversial.
Well, Roy, unfortunately we're at the end of our time, but since you've offered to share this slide deck with anyone who might want it, could you share your email address?
Absolutely. You can get a hold of me at Roy, R-O-Y, .snell, S-N-E-L-L, at corporate compliance, all one word, corporatecompliance.org. org, and I would be more than glad to give it to you. I absolutely do not want any copyright recognition, no nothing. There's a whole bunch of other good stuff in this slide deck. It's basically what every leader needs to know about compliance and ethics programs, and I want you to take it, reword it, use it. If you want to say where you got it, say where you got it. You don't need to check for copyright. I think that what we've talked about today is one of several things that are in here that will help compliance officers make the most out of their time with the C-suite, with the board, with division heads, department heads, supervisors, and including my favorite page, which is a one-page description of a compliance program that helps people who really don't have enough time throughout the year to devote to understanding your role in your compliance program. It helps them get it a little quicker, and you can have it and change it and edit it and whatever.
Thanks again. I look forward to continuing the dialogue.
Thank you, Tom.